They locked me outside my own neighborhood for 11 days, and the person who did it was the same person who claimed she was protecting our community. I was 68 years old, a retired Navy veteran, and after spending more than 2 decades paying my dues, maintaining my home, and doing everything by the book, I suddenly became a problem simply because I asked one question nobody wanted to answer. Where's the money going? My name is Frank Dawson, and I never imagined that a disagreement over an HOA fee would uncover something much bigger than a neighborhood argument. I moved into Willow Creek Preserve in North Carolina back in 2003. It was the kind of place people dream about when they retire. Quiet streets, big oak trees, neighbors waving from their driveways, kids riding bikes in the afternoon, and a sense that everybody was looking out for each other. After 30 years in the military, I wanted peace more than anything. I wasn't looking for fights. I wasn't interested in politics. I just wanted a small house, a little garden in the backyard, and enough quiet mornings to drink my coffee while watching the sunrise. For 21 years, I paid my HOA dues on time, never missed one payment, never received a violation notice. I attended meetings when I could, volunteered during community cleanups, and even helped repair the old neighborhood Veterans Memorial because I believed a community was something people built together, not something a few people controlled. Then, everything changed when Melissa Carter became the new HOA president. Melissa was 50 years old, a successful real estate broker, and she had a certain way of walking into a room that made people notice her. She always dressed perfectly, always spoke confidently, and always reminded everyone that she knew how to increase property values. At first, most people welcomed her. New leadership sounded good. Fresh ideas sounded good. But within her first month, things started feeling different. Meetings became less like discussions and more like announcements. Questions were treated like complaints. And whenever someone disagreed, Melissa had a habit of smiling politely while making you feel like you were the unreasonable one. Then came the email that started everything. One Tuesday morning, every homeowner received a message titled Mandatory Community Security Improvement Assessment. Inside was a notice saying every household had to pay an additional $900 within 30 days for new security upgrades, cameras, and gate improvements. The problem was simple. Nobody had voted on it. There was no homeowner meeting, no approval process, no explanation beyond a few paragraphs about protecting our investment. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that email twice because I thought maybe I had missed something. I even checked the attachment 3 times. Nothing. No vote, no paperwork, just a demand. I wasn't angry because of the money. $900 is not nothing. But after years of work and military service, I understood paying for things that mattered. What bothered me was the idea that someone could simply decide for hundreds of families and expect everyone to stay quiet. So I did what I always did. I opened the HOA bylaws. I found the section about special assessments. Any fee above $500 required a homeowner vote before it could be collected. I printed the page, highlighted the exact paragraph, and sent Melissa a respectful email. I wrote, "I'm happy to discuss this with the community, but according to our governing documents, this assessment requires homeowner approval." I expected a conversation, maybe a disagreement, maybe even an argument. What I didn't expect was silence. 3 days passed, no reply. A week passed, nothing. Then, on the morning of June 14th, I drove toward the neighborhood entrance after a grocery run, tapped my access card against the gate scanner, and saw a red light, access denied. I tried again, same thing. For a moment, I actually laughed because I thought it was some kind of computer mistake. I called the HOA office and explained what happened. The woman on the phone looked up my account and said, "Mr. Dawson, your access has been restricted due to an outstanding balance." I told her there was no outstanding balance. My regular dues were paid. She paused, then lowered her voice and said, "The balance is the security assessment." I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter. I asked, "Are you telling me I'm locked out of my own neighborhood because I questioned a fee that was never voted on?" She didn't answer directly. She just said, "Those were President Carter's instructions." And that was the moment I realized this was no longer about $900. This was about power. I called Melissa directly. She answered after several rings. I said, "Melissa, my gate access has been shut off." She calmly replied, "Frank, everyone has responsibilities. The community can't function if people refuse to contribute." I said, "I paid everything I legally owe," she responded. That's your opinion. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was rude, but because it showed exactly how she saw things. The rules weren't rules when they got in her way. They were just obstacles. I sat there outside that gate, looking at the road that led to my own home, and for the first time in 21 years, I felt like a stranger in the place I helped build. I had no idea that this 11-day fight would eventually expose something hidden inside our HOA's finances, and I definitely didn't know that the person trying to force me into silence had left behind a trail of evidence that was about to change everything. The first few days after I was locked out felt almost unreal. You know that feeling when something is so ridiculous your brain keeps telling you it has to be a misunderstanding? That was me. I kept thinking someone would call, apologize, and say, "Frank, sorry, there was a mistake in the system." But that call never came. Instead, every morning I had to park my truck outside the neighborhood entrance, grab my groceries, my medication, and whatever I needed for the day, then walk nearly half a mile back to my house. Now, half a mile might not sound like much when you're young and healthy, but I was 68 years old, carrying an old knee injury from my deployment years, and some days that walk felt like a reminder of every mile I had already carried in my life. The funny thing is, I had walked through deserts and foreign streets wearing military boots, but somehow walking past my own neighborhood gate with a bag of groceries felt like the hardest walk I had taken in years. It wasn't the distance, it was what that gate represented. It represented someone telling me, "You don't belong here unless you do what I say." My neighbors noticed. Some would slow down in their cars and ask, "Frank, what happened?" I explained the situation, and almost every person had the same reaction: surprise, confusion, then anger. Because once people understood the details, they started asking questions of their own. One neighbor, Tom, told me, "Frank, if they can do this to you, they can do it to anyone." That sentence stuck with me, because he was right. This wasn't just about me getting through a gate. It was about whether a small group of people could rewrite the rules whenever they wanted. On the 5th day, I attended an HOA meeting from outside the building because apparently I was welcome to hear about the community I couldn't fully access. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat in the back while Melissa stood at the front presenting her security plan like she was announcing a major city project. She talked about safety, property values, and protecting investments. She used all the right words. Words people like hearing. Words that sound responsible. But every time someone asked about the vote requirement, she changed the subject. Finally, I raised my hand. "Melissa, can you explain why homeowners were not allowed to vote on a $900 assessment?" The room got quiet. She looked directly at me and smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they think they already won. She said, "Frank, sometimes leadership requires making difficult decisions." I replied, "Leadership also requires following the rules." A few people nodded. Someone in the back said, "That's exactly what we're asking." For the first time, I saw Melissa lose control of the room. Not completely, but enough. She quickly ended the discussion and moved on. That was when I knew there was something she didn't want people looking at too closely. But I still didn't know what. I just knew something felt wrong. The real turning point came on the 10th day when my daughter Emily came to visit. Emily is a certified public accountant, and she has always had this habit of noticing things other people miss. When she was a kid, she could tell when a store cashier gave us the wrong change before we even left the counter. She jokes that numbers talk to her. That afternoon, she walked into my kitchen, looked at my paperwork spread across the table, and asked one simple question. "Dad, why does this fee exist?" I explained everything. The assessment, the missing vote, the gate restriction. She listened quietly, then said, "Something doesn't add up." She wasn't talking about the fee itself. She was talking about the way Melissa was handling it. Emily asked if she could see the HOA financial records. I had looked at some documents before, but honestly, I never thought I needed to understand every line item. I trusted the system. That was my mistake. Emily spent the next 3 hours at my dining room table with her laptop open, comparing expense reports, invoices, bank statements, and payment records. I watched her expression change slowly. At first, she looked curious, then confused, then concerned. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Dad, I think you need a lawyer." I laughed a little because I thought she was being dramatic. I said, "Emily, I'm fighting a gate card, not taking down a corporation." She looked at me and said, "No, you're not. You're looking at missing money." That was the moment the entire situation changed. She showed me a spreadsheet she created. According to the HOA reports, certain maintenance and consulting expenses had been paid over the previous year, but when she compared those expenses with actual invoices and vendor information, there was a gap, a big one. Nearly $74,000 was unaccounted for. I remember staring at that number thinking there had to be another explanation. I wanted there to be another explanation, because the alternative meant someone I trusted, someone who stood in front of our neighbors talking about responsibility, might have been doing something completely different behind closed doors. Emily started digging deeper. She found repeated payments to a company called Cedar Ridge Solutions, 15 separate checks over 11 months. The strange part was that nobody in the neighborhood had ever heard of them. No employees, no office location, no website, just a mailing address. Emily searched state registration records and found something that made her stop. Cedar Ridge Solutions had been registered shortly before Melissa became HOA president, and the registered owner was connected to a name Melissa had previously used before marriage. Suddenly, the mystery fee made sense. The pressure, the urgency, the refusal to answer questions. It wasn't just about collecting money. It looked like someone was trying to cover a hole before anyone noticed it existed. I sat there in my kitchen, looking at the documents, and I felt something I hadn't felt during the entire 11 days. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, disappointment, because this wasn't some stranger who made a mistake. This was someone who had been trusted with our homes, our money, and our community. The next morning, I contacted an attorney. I brought every document Emily had collected. The lawyer spent about an hour reviewing everything, then looked up and said, "Frank, this isn't a neighborhood disagreement anymore. This is something much bigger." Within 48 hours, the entire situation would change. The same gate that had kept me outside my home would become the first piece of evidence in a case that would expose everything Melissa had tried to hide. And when she finally realized I wasn't backing down, she would come to my front door asking for the one thing she never expected to need from me: mercy. The morning the court order came through, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold because I had been staring at the same stack of documents for almost an hour. Funny how life works sometimes. For 11 days, I had been fighting over something as simple as opening a gate. But by that point, I knew the gate was never the real issue. The gate was just the first sign that something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. When my attorney called, I almost didn't answer because I thought it was another update that would lead to more waiting. But then I heard his voice, calm and steady, and he said, "Frank, we got the order. The judge granted the emergency request. Your access has to be restored immediately, and the HOA's accounts are frozen until a complete financial review is finished." I just sat there quietly for a moment. After everything that happened, I expected to feel angry or excited, but what I actually felt was relief. The kind of relief you feel when someone finally turns the lights on in a room you've been standing in the dark for too long. I wasn't trying to win a fight anymore. I was trying to prove that I wasn't crazy for asking questions. I was trying to prove that being responsible and following the rules shouldn't make you a target. That afternoon, I drove toward the entrance of Willow Creek Preserve again. The same gate that had rejected me for 11 days slowly opened in front of my truck. I know it sounds strange, but I actually slowed down as I drove through. I looked around at the neighborhood, the houses, the lawns, the people walking their dogs, and I thought about how close we came to losing control of something that belonged to all of us. That gate wasn't just metal and electronics anymore. It represented the difference between a community that listens and one that blindly follows whoever speaks the loudest. I had barely parked in my driveway when my phone started ringing. Neighbors were calling. Some wanted updates. Some wanted to apologize because they admitted they had stayed quiet at first. One neighbor told me, "Frank, I saw what happened to you, and I honestly thought maybe you had done something wrong. I'm sorry I didn't ask questions sooner." I told him, "Don't apologize. That's how these things happen. People assume someone else is watching." And that was probably the biggest lesson from the entire experience. Problems don't always grow because everyone agrees with them. Sometimes they grow because everyone is too busy, too tired, or too uncomfortable to question them. That evening, just before sunset, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, Melissa Carter was standing there. But this wasn't the same Melissa who had stood in front of the HOA meetings speaking with confidence, telling everyone she knew what was best for the neighborhood. That person was gone. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were lowered. Her voice was quieter. She said, "Frank, can we talk?" I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I just looked at her, Because in that moment, I remembered every conversation we had before. The emails she ignored, the way she dismissed questions, the way she acted like the rules only mattered when they benefited her. She stepped closer and said, "I know things look bad, but I never wanted this to happen." I asked her, "Then what did you think would happen when people started asking where the money went?" She looked away. She started talking about stress, pressure, mistakes, and how things got out of control. Maybe there was a part of her that believed she could explain her way out of it. Maybe she convinced herself that she was only borrowing time. But at some point, a mistake becomes a choice, and a choice becomes a pattern. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Please, Frank, don't take this further." I remember that moment clearly because I had imagined confronting her so many times during those 11 days. I imagined yelling. I imagined telling her exactly how angry I was. But standing there, face to face, I didn't feel the need. The evidence was already speaking for me. I simply said, "Melissa, I didn't do this to you." I asked for transparency. Everything after that was your decision. Then I closed the door. The full audit took several weeks. And when the results came back, they confirmed what my daughter Emily had suspected. The financial record showed a pattern of questionable payments totaling nearly $74,000 through Cedar Ridge Solutions. The company that appeared on paper as a consulting service had little evidence of actual operations, no visible employees, no meaningful business presence, just invoices and payments that raised serious concerns. Investigators determined that the money had been improperly taken from HOA funds, and Melissa was charged with financial crimes related to the missing money. The same woman who once claimed she was protecting our neighborhood was now facing the consequences of ignoring the very rules she demanded everyone else follow. But what happened afterwards surprised me. I thought the neighborhood would split apart. I thought people would become angry and suspicious of each other. Instead, something completely different happened. People started paying attention. Homeowners who had never attended a single HOA meeting showed up early. They started reading financial reports. They asked questions. They wanted to understand how decisions were made. It was almost like everyone realized we had spent years assuming someone else was watching the door, only to discover nobody was actually checking who had the keys. The legal settlement covered my expenses and damages, but I knew that wasn't enough. A check would fix my situation, but it wouldn't fix the system. So I pushed for something bigger. I negotiated a compliance agreement that required stronger financial oversight. For 3 years, I would review major expenses, monitor reports, and make sure homeowners had a clearer picture of where their money was going. The HOA also added mandatory quarterly audits and updated procedures that made it harder for any future board member to operate without accountability. Some people asked me why I bothered. They said, "Frank, you could have taken your money and walked away." And maybe they were right. Maybe the easier choice would have been to forget everything and move on. But after what happened, I realized something. A community is not protected by the people with the most authority. It's protected by ordinary people who care enough to ask difficult questions. A few months later, I decided to run for the HOA board. That was never part of my retirement plan. I didn't dream about spending my mornings reading financial reports or sitting through board meetings. I wanted to fish, work on my garden, and enjoy a quiet life. But sometimes life puts you in a position where you either complain about what's wrong or help fix it. The homeowners voted, and I won by a strong margin. Today, Willow Creek Preserve is different, not perfect, because no community is perfect, but different. People speak up more. Meetings are more open. Records are easier to access. And every month, I still think about that little red light on the gate that started this entire thing. It was supposed to keep me out, but instead, it opened my eyes. Looking back, I don't see myself as someone who defeated an HOA president. I see myself as a homeowner who refused to stop asking questions. Because sometimes the biggest problems don't come from people breaking the rules. Sometimes they come from people who believe they are above them. And that's why I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever lived somewhere where a board, a manager, or a person in authority started making decisions without listening to the people affected by them? Do you think homeowners should challenge those decisions, even when it creates conflict? Or do you think sometimes it's better to avoid the fight and let things go? Share your experience in the comments, because I know there are thousands of people who have stories they've never told. And if you want to learn the simple financial review method my daughter used to uncover the missing money, subscribe to the channel, because I'll show exactly how ordinary homeowners can spot warning signs before problems become disasters. Because in the end, Justice doesn't always begin with a courtroom. Sometimes it begins at a kitchen table, with a person looking at a document and having the courage to say, "Wait a minute, something here doesn't make sense."